You know, the best thing about a soundbar is that it gives you surround sound capabilities without the need for multiple, often bulky speakers scattered throughout your room. And a Dolby Atmos soundbar not only reproduces the sound of the ear level speakers, but also the ones above you. And the Samsung Q950T that I have right here is one of those soundbars which produces 13.1 channels, including the 4 overhead. So just how effective is it, and more importantly, how does it actually sound? Well, this is the review. Stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. And here we have the Samsung Q950T soundbar, which is their flagship model for the 2020 model year. It's a 13.1 channel soundbar with a 9.1.4 configuration and comes with a total of 4 pieces in the box. The soundbar, the 2 rear channel speakers, and the subwoofer, along with an HDMI cable and power cables for all 4 speakers. The soundbar houses the left, center, and right channels, the front wide channels, as well as the 2 front overhead channels. Then there are 2 rear satellite speakers, which houses a rear overhead channel each. Finally, there's the 8-inch ported subwoofer, which handles both the sub bass and a lot of the mid bass for that low-end kick. The soundbar is a 9.1.4 configuration, as I said, which means it has 9 ear level channels, as well as a subwoofer and 4 overhead channels, and supports Dolby Atmos and DTS. It has 3 HDMI 2.0 ports, with 1 supporting an enhanced audio return channel, or EARC, to send lossless audio from your TV to the soundbar from devices connected through the TV's HDMI ports, such as game consoles or Blu-ray players, for example, or even the TV's built-in apps. It has 4 sound modes: a game, standard, adaptive, and surround sound mode, all of which upmixes the material to some degree, except for the standard mode, which stays faithful to the channels of the original source. The adaptive and the surround modes are more suited for movie watching, since they engage the satellite speakers a bit more than the others, so you hear more of the effects around you. The adaptive mode is definitely the more lively of the 2 in my room, with the effects being more pronounced in that mode. It takes into account both your room and the type of material you're listening to, so it's supposed to perform better. It's also the mode which creates the widest soundstage in my experience. The surround sound mode also upmixes too without the adaptability, but regardless of the mode, the soundbar does a good job of mixing content by sending effects to the rear and overhead channels, so you feel like you're enveloped by the sound. It's actually really impressive that just these 4 pieces can do all that. Sometimes though, it has some questionable results where the effects in the rear channels are just too loud and become a bit distracting. Thankfully, you can adjust the levels of the channels, but just not individually. So you can change the level of, say, the rear speakers as 1, just not the left or right individually. Weird, right? Especially since the speaker placement will depend on the layout of your room, where one speaker might be closer to the listener than another. Overall, it did a good job of upmixing. Just note that when you're listening to Dolby Atmos or DTSX content, you won't be able to change the surround sound modes. When paired with a Samsung QLED TV like the Q90T that I have right here, then that enables the Q Symphony mode, which plays the TV speakers in tandem with the soundbar. And for that to work, the devices have to be connected to the TV itself and not directly to the soundbar. It definitely makes the front stage sound larger, but because the speakers of the soundbar and the TV are so different, then they're not voice matched. So if you're sensitive to that, then it may be distracting. When listening to just the soundbar up front with, say, like 2-channel music in standard mode, for example, it has a wider sound stage than one would expect from a relatively narrow bar that's not even wider than a 65-inch TV. That said, having just the fronts active doesn't create as wide a sound stage as the surround modes do, since they also enable the front wide channels. When listening to music, the vocals were really clear and instruments came through clearly as well without seeming distorted. The bass from the included 8-inch ported sub wasn't as tight as what you'd hear from a sealed sub, but it didn't lack any presence either. You could definitely feel it at higher volumes. I did hear some distortion when I really pushed the volume though, as one would expect. But I don't think it'll have any problems filling a medium to a room on the larger size with sound without having distortion. I was able to push the volume to about 70% before I could start to hear some distortion creep into the music, which is way louder than I would listen to music to. Normally 20 to 30 would be plenty enough for me. For music listening, I definitely prefer the adaptive mode with the rear channels turned down a bit though. It just sounded overall better with a wider soundstage. So how is it for movies? Well, that depends on what you find important. Now, like I mentioned, it has great voice clarity when listening to music, and it's the same for dialogue when watching movies. The 9 ear level channels and the DSP controlling them do a really good job of projecting sound all around you, so you can hear effects coming from all directions with seamless panning. The 4 overhead channels, which bounces sound off the ceiling, also creates a convincing Dolby Atmos overhead effect. It's not quite the level of, say, discrete in-ceiling speakers, but it can be pretty convincing nonetheless with certain effects, especially those with higher frequencies. The race scene in Ready Player One, for example, with all the objects and car parts just flying around everywhere, is a great example of this. That's one of my favorite test scenes, and the sheer chaos of the race came across very well. The 8-inch sub does a good job of filling out the low end also. It's ported for more output and is fully capable of rattling the room with some deep bass, which certainly helped the dynamics of the system. When pushed to higher volumes though, it does begin to distort. I mean, there's only so much an 8-inch sub can do after all. So what don't I like about the soundbar? Well, for one thing, the built-in display faces upward, and the only indication you have of remote control commands being registered are from some small dots that light up on the front of the unit. You have to stand up and go over to it to see exactly what setting it has, or to verify changes that you made. Since the drivers in the speakers are relatively small, they don't have the fullest of frequency response, so they need the subwoofer to handle not only the sub bass, but also a portion of the mid bass frequencies as well. And that's where I find the system to be lacking somewhat. High range frequencies are great, low frequencies also, but there's a portion of the mid-range response that makes certain impacts and collisions seem anemic when compared to larger dedicated speakers. Also, since all the speakers are wireless, then they all need a power cable. That's not an issue though, since they need to be powered somehow, but the issue I have is that the speakers, and especially the subwoofer, sometimes crackle from interference from my wireless router, which sat 3 feet away from the soundbar under my entertainment center. That is probably a worst case scenario though, since the 2.4 and the 5 GHz radios in my router likely create a lot of wireless interference. It all went away when I moved it though, so you'll have to be mindful of potential wireless interference, especially if you have a wireless router nearby. Also, I've dusted speakers in the past. I'm pretty used to it actually, but I've never had to actually lint roll speakers before to get dust off. But these have a cloth covering, which makes it very hard to get dust off without using a lint roller, so I guess I can't say that anymore. On the bright side though, it makes it so that the soundbar won't actually reflect light from the TV back to the viewer, since the top of the soundbar is especially matte, so there won't be any light reflected back at you, the viewer. I really think it's a good use of materials, and it makes for a pretty unique look. So who is this for? Well, if you want to experience better, more immersive sound than what's possible on a TV, but you don't want the complication or bulk of having an AV receiver and multiple speakers in your room, then this is a great option. Not only does it create a clear front stage, but with dedicated surrounds and overhead channels, it creates the full Dolby Atmos and DTS surround sound experience. It's small, but it packs a big punch. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about what you think about the Q950T soundbar in particular, or soundbars in general for that matter. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Samsung for sending the soundbar out for review. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villaman saying be safe and peace.